the Dick Cavett Show. With special guest star, Orson Welles. Ladies and gentlemen, Dick Cavett.
Thank you, that's very kind. You've made a timid, practically unknown American feel very welcome. And I'm sure Mr. Welles appreciates it. Oh, it's me I was talking about. It's me, it's I. You can always tell an American over here. Have you noticed that? He's the one carefully looking to the left before stepping off the curb and getting flattened by a lorry. I swear I've come that close about 20 times. It is nice to come back to London. I always love it when I come back here. It's nice to come back to a place a year later and find some of the buildings still standing that were here when you were here before. In America, antiquity means almost nothing. A historian in my country is anyone who can remember the Democratic Party. But anyway, here we are. Do you try to take advantage of Americans when you see them here? I am not as gullible as you think. I happen to know. So don't try this on me. I know that Piccadilly Circus is not an actual circus. Some man tried to tell me there was a zebra crossing there, and I laughed in his face. Remind me to explain that back in America. Zebra is zebra, and crossing is a I'll tell you when I get home. Anyway, I don't want to waste too much time out here because we have such an unusual treat tonight, having my guest with us. He's Orson Welles, as I mentioned to you earlier. I was out here talking to the audience a little before the show for the people watching at home. He did he's done so many incredible things. One of them that always stands out in everyone's memory is a radio broadcast he did that frightened Americans. They took it too seriously and were terrified by it. This is a problem I often have with my comedy. People take it seriously and are terrified by it. But you seem to be in very good shape, and so we will be right back with Mr. Orson Welles. Stay with us. I can't think of too many people that I would be able to talk to on television for an hour and a half and then some, and then want to have him back and back. And Orson Welles is certainly one of the few, maybe the only one that I know of. He is, I think of him as a sort of bottomless pit of conversation. As you know, a lot of the facts of his life. His first film, Citizen Kane, turned Hollywood upside down, and his radio program, The War of the Worlds, upset the Eastern Seaboard. His appearance as an actor, I can never get enough of them. I don't want to call him a genius, as so many people have, because he once said that in Hollywood, a genius is someone who is either dead or unavailable. So he is very much alive, and he is backstage right now, although it isn't that easy to find him. Will you welcome, please, the amazing Orson Welles. Let's see now, where were we?
Where were we?
Yes, it's been, this is about our third time together, or fourth, I've lost count now. Do you travel a great deal?
Yeah, too much.
Yeah. Do you get the thing I get where when you've flown in a jet, it takes you several days to get over it, a kind of,
Several years.
You get it?
I think it's, I don't know how I don't think that the chiefs of state ought to be allowed to meet each other until 4 or 5 days after their trip. So I don't think anybody's normal after a jet trip.
Do you have any idea what that is? I get it very bad. I had to come here several days early to...
I'm sure it has to do with the fourth dimension or something like that. It isn't just speed. It can't be just that. It may have to do with the pressure. It may have to do with, you know, something Dr. Einstein could explain.
Being in a pressurized cabin might have to do something to do with it.
Or just time. You know, some mystery of... the speed, whatever it is, it makes me. I feel as though I had flu or something when I get out of it.
It's interesting you said that thing about diplomats because, or heads of state.
Yes, or anybody in a responsible position. And I think companies, big companies, often forbid their representatives to have important meetings after long jet flights. Now, shouldn't governments be forbidden to make big decisions after jet flights. They're always making them instantaneously.
Flying to Paris for a meeting and then...
Peking or whatever.
That's right. That's interesting. I wonder if presidents are affected by it. Maybe they have better jets than the rest of us.
Well, I think it's probably a disease of, not a disease, it's a weakness of power, isn't it? To think that you're above normal human frailties. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be very hard to get to the message to a president or a prime minister or a dictator that he really wouldn't be himself right after that trip, you know? Who is the fellow who would tell him that, you know?
Yeah. Which yes man?
Yes. Yeah. Because they don't listen to their doctors. Enormous decisions have been made in the last 30 or 40 years by people who've had 2 and 3 strokes, in which the map of the world has been changed by sick men. And I think everybody's a little sick after a great long plane flight. But who's ever going to tell anybody in power to stay in the hotel for a day? They always have to go off and look at the Bolshoi Ballet, you know? And that's signed some tremendous document.
Yeah. It's interesting. It was not far
I hope
from...
so.
It was to me. Let's assume it is. It was not far from here that one part of your life that I'm not too clear about took place. I've always heard, I have this image of you in Ireland coming over a hill with a horse and a cart, as it's been
Donkey
reported.
and cart.
A donkey? It's true.
A donkey and cart.
Were you a forerunner of the hippie movement in some sense?
Well, I wish I could pretend to have been that. I think I was just a latter-day romantic, you know, rather than a forerunner of the hippie movement, because really it's a kind of ridiculous romantic thing to do, to go and buy a donkey and cart and travel around Ireland, sleep under the cart. I was trying to be a painter, you know. I only wanted to be a painter.
You were in your teens then, weren't you?
Yes, I was 15. And I had got a scholarship to Harvard, which I didn't want. And in order to stay out of university, which struck me as the most terrible fate that could possibly happen to anybody, I really ran away with a few $100s that was found in the box after my father died, and went to Ireland. I bought a donkey and cart in Galway and started out. And at night I slept under the cart. I had the paints in the cart. I painted every day that it wasn't raining, which means I didn't do much painting. And I ended up with no paintings at all, because the Irish, in those days anyway, particularly in the West, would take no money for food or anything from somebody like that traveling around. But they wanted a painting. So these thatched cottages of Connemara are absolutely full of terrible Wells paintings. Then I came to Dublin. I was broke, had no money at all, and the only thing to do was go back and go to Harvard. So I went to the Gate Theatre, which was the great theater of Dublin. And I told them I was a famous star from New York, and that it would amuse me for a few weeks to play some leading parts in that theater. No. I'd never been on the stage. I had no idea what it was like to be on the stage. And I never would have been able to tell such a lie if I'd had any ambition to be on the stage or any idea. Mm-hmm. It was just the kind of lie you can tell, because what can they do to you? You know, you go on the stage, what do they got to kill you? All they do is fire you. It's a way to eat. So they gave me a star part. I began as a star. And I've been working my way down slowly ever since.
I don't know why more people don't think of that. It's much easier. Wait, excuse me, Orson, we must take this message, and then we'll be right back. Stay where you are. Something just struck me odd, because I found a quote of something you had said, or presumably said. You've told me in the past that you don't always say the things they've said you've said. But it struck me odd because we're sitting here on television, and this is a quote where you said, "Today we are pressed like toadstools against the seated nourishment of television, like so many moist and featureless blobs."
I said something like that. Yeah.
Seated nourishment is a strange phrase.
I think that's a typo.
It must be. I was trying to
Either I was drunk, because it doesn't make any sense, does it?
Seated nourishment.
No,
I swear that
must be sated.
Sated nourishment.
Even that doesn't make any sense, but it sounds.
It's getting closer.
Yeah. It's one of those. It's one of those remarks like, there was a line in an old play, The Barretts of Wimpole Street, you remember it?
Yeah.
And there was a line in it, I think came from, that Browning really said, when Elizabeth Barrett shows him a poem, says, I don't know what it means, and he reads it and takes a long pause, and then says, when that was written, only God and Robert Browning knew what it meant, now only God does.
And that's
the point of my mentioning that is that I used to be something called the voice of cornstarch pudding, or Caro, or something like that, on American television, radio, and I was on for 15 minutes every day, reading poetry with a little orchestra behind at noon. You can imagine what an enormous public that was. Anonymously. It was when I was an anonymous radio actor, and I had to write a little lead-in for a poem. And at that time, I was running a theater in Harlem, and we rehearsed from midnight until 6 in the morning. And then I did Big Sister and Aunt Jenny and several soap operas. And then I would come on and be the voice of cornstarch, you see. And I was so tired when I came to it one day, I couldn't figure out what this poem meant at all. And I remembered this line. And my exhaustion reached the point that I said, when this was grittin', only Grob and Dribbit Browning grit it. And then I stopped and said, when Gris was drittin', Brob and Gribbet trimming. Gribbet. And there were about 100 sponsors in a little tiny control room, all turning puce. You know? And I made one more try. I won't even attempt the variations that I managed on it, and just put the script down and left the studio and never came back. It just ended my career as the voice of cornstarch. Yes.
And you've never been back.
And that made me think of it when you said, what does that sentence mean? Because it really is one of those. When I said it, only God and Wells knew what it meant, now only God does.
Maybe we'll figure out sealed nourishment. Maybe it was sealed
sated nourishment.
Sated, it sounds even better.
It sounds great, yes.
Let's say it was that. Yes. I always wonder why you don't do a book of, any number of books, but just one on Hollywood memories. You were there. You started there.
Yeah, well, I started in Hollywood, yes.
Yeah. That's what I mean. I started to say you started there at a time which has become legendary now.
Yes, I was at the end of it. But just the last kind of golden twilight of the great Hollywood days.
You'd like to have been there a few years earlier?
Yes, but they were still there, all those great people. They were still giving those parties. The war hadn't come. It was the sort of Gotterdammerung moment. It was fascinating. And of course, the parties and I had a terrible experience. The first dinner party I went to was the first night I arrived in Hollywood. And it's when I ran out of luck for the rest of my life, really, because I made a bargain with God, which is something which is a sin to do, and certainly a mistake. Because somebody at the dinner table, in those days, the ladies used to leave the table and leave the gentlemen to their port in Hollywood. This is hard to believe, but in Sam Goldwyn's and Jack Warner's and houses like that, they really observe these fine old English traditions. The ladies had left and the gentlemen were passing the port around. And somebody said, well, here's Orson Welles come from the theater in New York, and he's a famous storyteller.
That's nice.
And everybody looked eager. And some people got up and sat closer. And a few drinks were finished, said that I had heard a funny joke that morning in the steam bath. So I thought, well, I'll tell a funny joke, and I got into it. And when I was about halfway into the story, I realized that I didn't remember the end of it.
Yes.
So I began to start to invent what might be the end of it. And this only made more eager expressions from everyone, because they were sure it was just getting to the thing that would be unendurably funny. And I said to God, between gasps, if you will get me out of this, I'll never ask for anything again. And at that moment, the chandelier fell down on the table. There was an earthquake.
Don't ask anything here tonight. We're sitting with a lot of very heavy equipment. We'll be right back after this message. Thinking about, I can't get over asking God's help to get out of a joke and getting an earthquake. I think that's true. Have you ever had any convincing evidence of ghosts, speaking of odd things like that? Or heard anyone who has?
Oh, yes, I do. But, I'm so opposed to all that stuff.
Oh, yeah?
That I hate to tell the things because I hate to increase people's credulity.
Yeah.
Because although I have had such experiences, I am against them, if you can understand such a point of view.
I can, I think.
You know,
because,
you know what I think? I think all these things exist in the way that electricity existed when we could see a spark from brushing our hair, and and that's about what electricity was until we understood it. I think that's just about what this whole ball of wax is. It's a sort of spark in the night occasionally, and it's very dangerous to play with it because our knowledge of it is too small.
I wondered, in Hollywood, people seem to be particularly interested in those things. Hollywood seems to go through phases of having seances.
Do they?
And it seems like, some years back when I was out there, they said the in thing was to go out to so-and-so's house, and they try to
have
contact
another
the
in thing
departed.
now, I think.
Something has replaced that?
Yeah, I believe so. But I think...
what is it?
It's a family program. I wouldn't want to go into that. I don't know that seances... When I was at Hollywood, they were always going to fortune tellers, of course. But, everybody does. The seance business, I've exposed some mediums. There's a magician friend of mine named Bamberg, who used to work, maybe you've heard of him, as an ex-magician. That's right.
Bamberg?
That's right. His father was called Theodore Bamberg, too, when he worked under the name of Fu Manchu.
Chinese.
Yeah. He was really Dutch-American, and he worked in Spanish using a Chinese accent, which is about as international as you can get. And he was the last great illusionist, and a terribly nice fellow. And he and I went on a little campaign of exposing mediums in Mexico City. And we exposed one who was making surgical operations in the dark by ghosts, cutting people open. And of course, it was a medical student who'd been flunked, who was a brother-in-law, who came in the darkness. But can you imagine going that far with it?
So he had some success, I suppose, but not...
Well, he got plenty of blood.
Yeah.
It's about as spooky a spook show as you can dream of.
And you exposed him.
Yeah, we got the police onto
How did you do? Did you go as customers and pretend to be...
culpable, as deep believers, you have to, and stay long enough. Go 2 or 3 times.
Didn't Houdini spend a large...
Yes, but he wanted to believe, The interesting about Houdini, he was longing to be convinced that it was true.
And why is that? How do you explain that?
Well, and he found out because he was a superb showman. There never was such a showman in my lifetime to equal him, because he was... First of all, let me backtrack and just tell about Houdini for a minute, because you have to be an old white-bearded goon like me to remember him now. People probably think of him as a sort of Channing Pollock, a sort of elegant magician, and if you would cast him properly, it would be as the early Eddie Robinson. He challenged. He came out on the stage and defied anybody to prove that he wasn't a miracle maker, He was a rough diamond, and he had the chutzpah of the world. He used to do the needle swallowing on the stage of the Hippodrome, which is the biggest theater in New York, and you could only see it in the first 2 rows because you know the trick. You swallow a lot of needles, then you swallow some thread, and then you unthread it. Dick, who's an ex-magician, will know about this, and all the needles are on the thread. Well, that's a great trick for about halfway into this audience. And he held the whole Hippodrome spellbound by what was sheer mime, because you couldn't see it. He was that kind of showman, He was also a terrible illusionist, because in the Hippodrome he used to do the famous vanishing elephant before your very eyes. He was a terrible illusionist. And they were 2 men pushed out a big box, and then they brought out a baby elephant and put him in the box, and 20 men pushed the supposedly empty box off the stage. Which showed a certain carelessness in the mise en scène, it seemed to me. But as a showman, in those years, he was the highest paid vaudeville act of all time, Yeah. Nobody ever got near him. Not even Harry Lauder. Nobody ever got his money.
And what was that in those days back?
Showmanship. He was on the front page every day. He was a headline. Of course, in those days, nothing was happening. And there was room, you know, to be a headline, but he was always getting himself thrown into the river, locked and shackled with chains and everything like that. And he passionately, he was mystic. He was the son of a rabbi. He could have been a mystic. He wanted a voice from the spirit world. That's how he got into exposing them, because he always hoped he would find one real one. Yeah. And of course, you know what he did when he died. He left the famous message, which was left in a bank vault. And if any medium was ever able to get that message, only Beatrice Houdini, his wife, knew it. And there was $20,000 for anybody who could deliver it. Nobody ever did. And she wanted to hear it, too.
Sure.
And she went to seance after seance until she died. You know, and there were people racking their brains to think what it could have been, you know.
Oh, they tried to dope it out.
Of course, you know, no, nobody ever did. And she never told, I believe, she never told what the message was.
Does it still lie in a vault somewhere?
I wonder.
Well, that's amazing. We'll be right back. We're back. I'm talking with Orson Welles. I met your daughter just before the show out in the corridor, Beatrice. Lovely girl.
Thank you.
Yeah. How old is Beatrice?
I always pretend she's younger than she is. It's the only way I can cling to my... She had her birthday. Beatrice, how old are you? She won't tell.
Oh, she's back.
She's 17.
She either won't tell us she's back in the green room.
Yeah, she's 18, I'm afraid, but I've been keeping her around 15 for the last 3 years.
Do you insist that all your children marry? Do you hope they will?
Oh, no.
No.
Oh, no, it's something they do in spite of me.
Oh, I see. I just wondered if you
I don't think you should insist on children marrying. I don't think anybody should get married if they can help it. And since almost nobody can resist it, it's a pretty safe thing to say. Yeah. This is a marrying age. Have you ever stopped to realize it? How many bachelors do you know?
4.
True bachelors.
3.
3. And you know, when I was a little kid, the world was full of bachelors.
That's right, and yet
happy uncles, you know? Clear-eyed, high livers, you know? It's a vanished race, the unmarried man.
This is supposed to be the age when marriage is vanishing from the scene.
No, they just keep doing it over and over and over again. But I'm not against marriage. That was just a facile joke. But I'm against parents interfering one way or another about it. And I do think, don't you, that people are luckier to marry later than earlier, for the most part.
Have you ever had a friend commit suicide?
Yeah, I've had friends that I've saved from suicide.
That's what I was going to try to get to with you. How would you convince someone that?
I don't know why, but that has happened to me over and over again. People who don't bother to call me when they come into town, when they decide to kill themselves, I'm the one they get in touch with. I don't know why. I've been involved with more true and phony suicides than I can name.
I can see why, maybe, because you have such a, I don't know, whether you seem to have such a tremendous appetite for life that maybe they think, well, Orson...
Well, it's nice of you to say that. I don't know why.
Would know why it's worth staying around if someone were totally, terribly down.
But also, you know, pulling out of the gas oven and taken to the hospital for the stomach pump and all that. I've been doomed to. I'm a sort of a specialist in these things, and it doesn't interest me at all. I'm very impatient with suicide, except for the good reasons, you know. I think there are good reasons for suicide.
Terrible illness, maybe?
I think an illness that will cost your family everything they have.
Mm-hmm.
I have really religious objections to suicide because you're tired of life. I don't think we own our own life. I'm not a stoic. I don't think we have a right to do away with ourselves just because we're not interested.
Who does own our life, then, if we don't?
I don't know.
But you feel there's
maybe that fellow I made the bargain with, you know, on the joke. But anyway, I have a deep-seated objection to suicide as such. But I think if you have a disease which is going to ruin your family, then suicide is mandatory. Because you can't trust the doctors or the hospitals. They're going to keep you alive as long as there's any money in the bank. You know?
How have you taken a friend who was in that state, and do you talk to them? Do you give them any
I'm not
guiding
very good at
principles
it. By saying I've had all these experiences doesn't mean I'm particularly expert. It's just happened to me over and over again.
Yeah.
What do you do? My attitude is one of great impatience, not I know just how you feel. This is how dare you. This is my line. Maybe they know I'm going to say that. Maybe that's why they get in touch with me.
They may just
But
want to
I'm
hear
not
that.
going to say, yes, I know just how you feel, and I was about to do it myself Tuesday, you know.
Do you have black moods of depression that you're...
Yes,
that you're given to?
what did Churchill call it? He had a wonderful word, the black dog he talked about. When the black dog came and lived with him. Something like that.
That is good.
Marvelous expression like
I
that.
hope that was it, because that's...
Yes, that really was it.
Yeah.
And
How do you deal with that?
I don't have many of them. I don't have many of them. I have for an hour and a half every day. I have that as the sun is going down. But it seems to be perfectly physiological. At the end of the day, I run out of energy. And it isn't so much melancholy or a black mood, it's a total incapacity to function unless I'm already working.
Yeah.
And that's just a sort of gloom about the end of the day. And the minute it's night again, I'm fine. But that's, it's so precisely related to the sun going down that I can't pretend to an interesting melancholia. I don't really suffer from it. I'm not an up and down fellow.
Uh-huh. It is interesting, though, that at that time of day, but you say it's not psychologically vulnerable, having to do with the symbolism
It must
of
be.
the
Who
sunset.
knows what it is? I know Roger Vadim, the director, suffers from it, too, enormously.
Do you avoid the sunset if you know it's that time of day?
I just notice on the set or working or whenever it is, and if I'm not working, I go to bed and sleep. I take a nap. When everybody else takes a martini, I take a nap. And that's what makes night possible for me. And of course, if you're making a movie or something, you can't say, now it's my nap time to the crew, you know? But and that's just the time when all the cameras are ready for the big close-up in which you're really supposed to show how good you are. And that's when I want to go to Betty Bye, you know? And it accounts for a lot of poor performances of mine. Because it takes about 7 hours to get that shot ready. And that's when the sun is going down.
Sun's going down. I think it's fascinating. One thing you touched on once earlier. As a very young boy, you were in Peking?
Yes, my father lived in Peking part of every year for quite a while, and I used to go and stay with him.
Do you have visual memories of it?
Oh, very great ones. Yes, I used to speak a little Mandarin, and China was part of my home memories as much as the Middle West. It's kind of the forbidden city in Grand Tour, Illinois.
I still find people who would assume that you were probably born in Budapest or in...
Alec Wolcott got so angry with me once at a party. He introduced me because he was the one who kind of started me again in show business, and he presented me as somebody at a party that should be interesting. And there I was, 19 years old. There wasn't anything interesting to say about me. I hadn't done anything in America. And whatever, he says, well, Orson was born in Peking. And I said, no. And a look of hatred came over Alex's face when I had told him it was Kenosha, Wisconsin, instead of Peking, because it was the only interesting thing he could think of to say about me.
But there are people who won't believe you were born in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Is there part of Wisconsin they've not been able to take out of the boy? Is there any Midwesternism still in you?
Lots, but not Kenosha, because I left at about 3 weeks. I was spirited out of town at the age of 3 weeks. But I was raised partly. My father bought a country hotel in a town with a population of 150 people called Grand Tour, Illinois. And he had this hotel because he had the kind of inverted snobism that made it impossible for him to have a country house. So he had a country hotel, and he didn't allow any guests in it. Any paying guests. They had to be just his friends. And anybody came hoping for a room, there was no highway past it or anything. They didn't have a chance of a bed. It was always said, we're full up. They could see it was empty, you know. And he had great cooks, and he made his own, had his own bakehouse, his own smokehouse, and lived this great kind of 1880 life, you know, and there was no car in town. We rode with a horse and buggy. It was like being raised 70 years ago instead of my real children. It was a wonderful experience. And he spent 2 months every year at in Grand Tour running this hotel. And the servants were all old show business people, because my father was mad about old but cheap show business people. There was a fellow called Rattlesnake Oil Emery, who had been a medicine showman. And there was a lady who could do the call of the birds, you know, by whistling. It was all made up of these kind of people who just lived there and ran this hotel and refused anybody a room in it until my father would come and stay. And it burnt down with him in it. He escaped, coming out of the flames while all his jade collection from China burned up and everything else. He was a very old man, because he was quite old when I was born. He emerged from the flames in a dressing gown, a real nightshirt, you know, the comic nightshirt, with a parrot in a cage and a signed photograph of Trixie Ferganza under his arm.
Who is Trixie Ferganza?
Trixie Ferganza was from the era of flesh-colored tights, you know?
And those were his treasures?
Well, that was what he brought out of the fire. He was an extraordinary sort of man.
Did you lose all your possessions once in a similar...
Yes, in a fire about 4 years ago in my house in Spain. My wife's house, really. We weren't there. Robert Shaw was staying there. And to get my papers and everything that I valued away from his kids and all the precious things, he put them in one wing of the house. And he also put the manuscript of his play, of which there was only one copy, in that wing, which was then struck by lightning and burnt to the ground.
Fate.
Oh, yes. All I did was laugh when anything is that bad. You know, I had the cup that Lincoln had given my grandfather when he was a little boy. I had my bullfighting pictures. I had every kind of thing you can imagine. And it all went up in smoke.
You hadn't asked God to help you out of a joke again, had you?
No,
That's terrible.
Yeah.
Does it just, when you lose everything like that...
I think it's a great should happen to everybody. I'm against possessions, you know.
Really? You felt a sense of being cleansed or something?
Yes, oh yes.
That's interesting.
Let's send that into Reader's Digest.
Okay. We have a message and we'll be right back. Orson, I don't know why it's hard to imagine you as a child, but it is.
Really?
Or as a teenager. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I think I can imagine people having trouble imagining me as a teenager, but it seems to me that I'm still a child.
Well, in the sense of what? Enthusiasm?
No, I think I'm more childlike than anything else. Certainly in my faults and even in such virtues as come to mind, it seemed to me that the maturity is not as evident as it ought to be with me. The beard is a big fraud. I used to wear a fake beard when I ran a repertory theater in New York, and I was about 21, and I had to give the actors hell for something. I always waited till the night when I was playing a part where I was made up as 70 years old. Then I'd call them all on the stage in the makeup, and they'd take it from me in the makeup, you know.
Because you had the authority.
Yes, they'd say, now, come on, we've got to have an end to this jabbering in the wings and so on. And they'd take it. But if I came on to that baby face, that terrible baby face that's, you know, I'm just getting rid of, you know.
You said
somebody called me once, said that I had the face of a depraved baby. And I still do, you know. I just put the beard on to try and hide it.
A depraved bearded baby. Yeah. That's really gilding the lily or something.
And I think it's easy for me to imagine myself as a child anyway. I'm surprised you can't.
Well, maybe
I was
an
awful child, of course.
Well,
I must have been.
There are all these legends,
that violin and everything, you know, just hateful. Show off.
And there are legends of your, at age 8, telling an opera singer she should practice her scales more carefully and things like that. You weren't that bad, were you?
No. I was pretty bad, but I knew my opera singers. Nobody ever says that to an opera singer.
No, I guess
and
not.
lives.
What about as a teenager? Were your first encounters with the opposite sex successful? Were you awkward with girls? Were you shy?
No.
Not?
No.
That puts you in a separate category, because most of us...
No, because I was constantly being seduced by girls. In other words, I wasn't in the... I was always being attacked by women as a child.
Is that true?
Yes, I had a marvelous sex life as a child.
Is it too personal to ask what age it started at?
Well, if I tell you, you won't believe it, so I better not answer.
But you mean
it's
women?
shockingly early age.
By
I had
older
those
women?
experiences that usually turn up in the sort of books that didn't used to be on public sale.
You mean
So I had a delicious time when I started off.
that's amazing.
It's like beginning as a star. Working my way down ever since.
Was this, if I'm not prying, was this older women or women your age? Or?
Oh, yes, you couldn't imagine a woman of my age then being able to do anything.
All right.
I was also popular with my own sex. I got pretty good at running away from old gentlemen, too.
Did you get that, too?
I was terribly popular because I had that round face and everything.
Yeah.
And that chorus boy look, and I got to be very nimble.
Older gentlemen.
Older gentlemen, yes. Who wanted to talk to me about poetry. I got onto that very early in life.
Yeah, and without anyone having to
Yes,
tell
and
you.
I had a terrible thing which I used to do, which I later used to recognize in girls when I would take them out when I became of a proper age to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in which I wouldn't say, no, I don't want to, but I would say, I don't, you know, I'm not feeling very well tonight. I want to go to sleep. And so I never insulted the gentlemen who attacked me. I always put them off the way girls do.
But you,
when they say they have to rest or something, you know.
Well, that's very polite, really. Was
yes,
it,
I was terribly nice
sort
to
of
them.
sense of sympathy,
Yeah.
or you know,
Yes, because I was
Yeah.
I never got angry about it.
Yeah. How much booze does it take to get you drunk?
Well, I haven't had a drink of booze in 2 years. Now I should think one glass would probably do it, because if you don't drink, you know, you lose your immunity to it. But in my strong boozing years, it took an awful lot. Yeah. And that's why I ruined my liver, because if you have a good head, you really do destroy yourself, because you don't have any message coming to you that you're drinking too much. Because if you don't get drunk quickly, you're getting bad liver before you know it. It's the people who get drunk quickly who have a good future with booze. I gave it up entirely. I drink a little wine now, that's all. But not because I had what is called a drinking problem. Mm-hmm. But because I found out that I'm a morning drinker.
Really? That's supposed to be sinister.
Yes. And I never, in my boozing days, almost never drank at night or in the afternoon, because like most low blood pressure people, and I'm strangely enough on that side, I used to like to drink in the morning to get going. And of course, that is a very bad thing. Yeah, and if you get those nice drinks like Bloody Marys and so on that don't seem like liquor, you suddenly realize that you're having a lot more Bloody Marys than anybody ought to be having before lunch.
The ones that seem like breakfast.
Yes, it's a breakfast. So I finally said, no more Bloody Marys, you know, and I said, never another drink of booze.
Gee, that's
stopped.
That's interesting. Say, I hope it's true. There's so many legends about you, but a former companion of yours and colleague in theater, John Houseman, has written a book in which there's one marvelous scene in which you got mad at him and threw flaming sterno cans at him in a restaurant. And I so like the image of that I hate to.
I want to assure you that if I had wanted to hit Houseman with a flaming sterno can, I would have made a bullseye of it.
He's an easy target, is he?
He's an easy target. Right. The sterno can was thrown to scare him. And it had that excellent effect and sent him back to New York, which was why I threw the sterno can. It was sheer fake theater, and it scared him, and it was a dirty trick, and I'm ashamed of it.
And if you met him now, would you be sorry?
No.
Oh.
I'm ashamed of it, but not sorry, if you can follow that.
I like that distinction, yes. There's also a rumor that you once burned a $100 bill in front of a waiter who gave you bad service.
My father did that. I wish it'd been me.
Oh, your dad did?
My father did it, yes, and in front of a steward. So it wasn't a $100 bill. It was a 5-pound note, which in my childhood was quite a thing to burn. Mm-hmm. That meant a lot of money, and he burned it slowly in a balloon glass while the steward watched, and then said that would have been yours if you'd given us good service.
So you did inherit some of your theatrical flair.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll be right back.
Say.
Talking with Orson Welles, and I guess I'm fascinated with you as a young kid. Did you go to Sunday school in the old Midwestern sense that I did in Nebraska?
No, when I went to boys' school, you see, for the only school I ever went to was for 3 years. And it was a great school. Todd's school doesn't exist anymore, so it's legitimate to mention it. And we marched in what here in England is called, isn't it a crocodile? What do you call it? Yes, and that long line into the town and went to Sunday school. And the man who, not Sunday school, to a kind of special service for the boys. And the Reverend Hershey, who conducted them, went out into a cornfield and covered himself with gasoline and burned himself alive. So those kind of things that happen in small towns, you know? We never knew why, but it always cast rather a sinister light on that kind of...
And that was the man who supposedly had given you your...
Our spiritual instruction, yes. He must have been a bit mixed up.
Did that shatter your faith, or
no?
Do you have faith, or?
Oh, have faith, yes. It's just one of those things that I think all these, there are no grisly stories in the world like the ones that happen in small towns. Wasn't it true of you're a fairly small town boy, aren't you?
Yes, and it is true. There's something about Midwestern towns seem to have, maybe it's because they stand out more, the most hideous murders.
Yes, I think small towns, I think it's probably true in England, too. I think the smaller the town, the more sensational the events. They not only stand out, but the more extraordinary things happen. Because you really, I guess you just get to know about people that you don't in a city. Know how really spooky and crazy and twisted and mad they are. In Grand Tour, where my father had that hotel, there was a house where a lady had a Christmas tree lit up all year long, and there was nothing else wrong with her, except she thought it was Christmas every day. That was a town of 150 people, you know. I had aunts. I had seven great aunts who were all insane.
Really mad.
Mad. One of them disappeared in a double rickshaw in China and was never found again.
It must have been an enormous rickshaw.
It was a double rickshaw. And in the other part of the rickshaw was my grandmother. There used to be tandem rickshaws. Yeah. And this was in Nanking or something. I don't know where it happened, long before I was born. And there was some kind of riot in the street, and they let the shafts of the rickshaw go back. And the two ladies tumbled into a mass of boiling Chinese. And Aunt Sue, or whatever her name is, was never heard of again.
Was there a wave of anti-Americanism then? Or?
Who knows what happened to Aunt Sue? She may have ended up as one of the leading madams in Shanghai. But anyway, that was the family story. It's very hard to believe, and I don't believe it now. But everybody swore it was true in my childhood. Poor aunt, whatever her name was, disappeared, in a double rickshaw.
If they weren't anti-American, they were anti-anti.
Yes, and then, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Then I had one who was... lived in Harlem under the impression that it was still the most fashionable address in New York, in a big brownstone, as it had been.
Well beyond the time.
Yes, well beyond the time, that it had been a place where the carriages drew up and so on. And I went, her name was Dot, rather appropriately, Dottie. And my father, no, it wasn't. I'm sorry, that was another aunt who went down the Jamestown flood on a grand piano. Aunt Grace, this was. Aunt Grace received us at the door when I went with my father as a boy of 6 or 7 to visit her in a slicker. You remember what those were? Those raincoats such as they wear in the tin cans for mackerel. Sure. And she had nothing obviously under it at all. And she received us, and we went into the parlor, and I had to go to the bathroom. And I went around, and I found what must have been her bath. And surrounding it was an enormous one with lion's feet supporting it and so on, were about 300 or 400 bottles, empty bottles of ginger ale. Empty bottles of ginger ale. And I came back and said to Aunt Grace, what is the ginger ale doing in the bath. And she said, well, dear, it's cheaper than champagne.
Wonderful
She
gift
was
for
bathing in it.
She was pouring the ginger ale.
Yes, cheaper than champagne.
You know,
so I have a close madness. That's when I say I'm crazy. I must be.
Gee, our time is just about gone. I was going to ask you to recommend a movie, but you made up a name of one time, and people are still trying to find it. So
Let's make it.
We won't do that. Let's Make It. Is that
Yes.
a new film that you want to?
No, let's make the movie we made up.
Oh, that we had the title of. Good. That's always the hardest part. This is just again a great pleasure, and please consider this place home and come back as often as you can.
Thank you, Dick.
Great pleasure to see you.
Great one for me.
Good night. Thank you. See you later.